a young man working in an office. When he receives a phone call, an unknown man blackmails him during the phone call and asks him to leave the building. The young man goes outside and stays in contact with the stranger, who asks him to drive to an empty street. Arriving at his destination, he notices a car and a man on the ground. He calls the police and then approaches the car. Suddenly, the man gets up from the ground and brutally kills the young man. The next day, an officer named John Luther and his partner Martin reach the crime scene and investigate. Soon, the missing young man's mother, Corinne, arrives here. Since they have not found the body, the mother is sure her son is somewhere, and John Luther promises to find him. In the process, a psychopathic killer is seen nearby, listening to the conversation. Subsequently, we get to know the killer, David. He is a wealthy city merchant and serial killer, who blackmailed and kidnapped the young cleaner. David contacts a secret agent to find out all the information he can about John Luther, because he wants to play a game with him. He deeply analyzes the various illegal actions committed by John as a police officer, and uses these details to his advantage. Because of this, John is fired and then arrested. As he is taken to prison, dozens of reporters try to ask him questions. In prison, everyone knows that John is a police officer, so they hate him from day one. Next day, while John is showering in prison, a couple of inmates attack him. On the other hand, we see Corinne, who gets a phone call. Actually, this call is from his son, who was missing this morning. The son gives her an address, and she immediately goes there to find him. She arrives in front of a white house, and then calls her son again. She hears the phone ring inside, and enters the house. She follows the phone's ringing, and in the process, other people arrive at the residence. Corinne arrives in a room, where she finds her son and other victims hanging. David has specifically lured the victims' parents into the house. Once everyone is present, a fire starts, and the house and the bodies catch fire. David, who is standing outside the house, approaches the window and starts knocking. Next, we see a detective named Rain, who receives a phone call while she is sleeping. She is called to the crime scene, and finds the victim's entire room burned. 8 victims are identified, and Rain notes that the first victim was killed 11 years ago and the last a year ago. Therefore, she deduces that the killer is a professional, with lots of money. In prison, John receives a letter with a number. It turns out that David sent a recording of the young man's murder through an FM radio frequency. David taunts him, and tells him that he has always been close to him but has never observed him. Soon, a security guard arrives, and John turns off the radio. The security guard tells him that he has a visitor, and he goes to meet Corinne, the young man's mother. When he asks her the reason for the visit, she blames him for her son's death, because he was unable to find the killer. She returns to the car, and we discover that she is with David, the murderer of her son. Apparently, David is pretending to comfort her during this difficult time. Later, John takes the phone hidden in the cell, and calls Detective Rain. He says he wants to help in the case, but she declines the offer, telling him she does not need the help of a murderer. She also warns him not to call again, or she will order that he be placed in solitary confinement. Later, Rain asks a colleague to order the prison guards to confiscate John's phone. Soon, the protagonist contacts an old friend, McCabe, to get him out of prison. It turns out that many years ago, David killed McCabe's daughter, and now John proposes that he catch the killer. Soon, prison guards arrive and take the phone from John. Then the protagonist meets 2 prison guards, and plans to create a diversion to escape from prison. In the evening, a fight breaks out among the inmates outside, and the guards are called to stop them. In the process, an inmate in the cell is about to kill himself. An emergency alarm goes off, and the 2 guards who remained inside run to stop the inmate. Suddenly, the inmate attacks them, and after he knocks them down, he opens the cells of the others. Now free, the inmates go to John's cell to kill him. He locks the door, but an inmate throws gasoline into his cell, and sets it on fire. John hits them with a burning mattress, and starts beating them. At one point, he gets surrounded by 6 inmates who beat him. Fortunately, he manages to break free and run away. Soon, the Special Forces team arrives, and throws a flash grenade. Then the officers spray the detainees with high-pressure water, and manage to stop them. Next, the Special Forces team grabs John, and takes him away. He gets into a van to be taken to another prison. On the way, the van is stopped by his old friend and his team. They free him from the handcuffs and leave. After this, we see David carrying a bouquet of flowers to his ex-wife. Apparently, many years ago, she cheated on him with a French guy. He killed the guy and threw acid on his wife's face. He then put her in a wheelchair, never to leave him again. McCabe takes John to a garage where his old car is. John gives his friend some money, and thanks him for helping. Meanwhile, Detective Rain is informed that John has escaped from prison, so she goes to meet a former detective named Martin, a friend of John's. She asks him for help in finding John. Martin goes to the prison, and investigates John's cell. He finds the voice recording on the radio, and tells Rain to locate the place where the signal originated, because John is definitely headed there. Actually, he is right, because John is already set to work, and found the place where the signal on the radio was derived from. Here John meets the radio host. Seeing John, the radio host runs away. John pursues him, and when he catches him, he begins to interrogate him. The radio host says that he was forced to play that voice recording on the radio. Unfortunately, he does not know David himself, and has never seen him. David communicates with him only through text messages. Also, David doesn't use the same number for more than a day. Meanwhile, the police are on their way to this building, and John is forced to leave. When the police arrive, he has already escaped, and they find only the radio host. The scene shifts to David talking to his collaborator. He shows David some kidnapped people being held hostage, who will be tortured live on the dark web. Next, John calls his friend Detective Martin, and tells him that he has the killer's number. He asks him to trace the number, because it will no longer be possible tomorrow. Martin agrees and says he will call him in 15 minutes. Then Martin manages to convince Rain to work together to trace David's number. Later, John receives David's location but tells him not to approach him. The police are approaching John's location. Rain's plan is to capture both John and David. We notice that on the roofs of the buildings, there are several people with GoPros attached to them. John calls David's cell phone, and when the latter sees him, he starts running away. David takes an innocent person hostage, and threatens John to stop. Soon, people on the buildings began to jump off, creating panic among the crowd. The police arrive, and Detective Rain orders John to raise his hands. In the process, David runs away, and John chases him. David flees into the subway, and then into a tunnel. John chases him, and then a fight breaks out between the two. Unfortunately, an officer arrives and hits John in the head, saving David. After catching his breath, David cuts the officer in the thigh, and runs away. He stops to take care of the officer's serious wound. The other part of the team also arrives, and the wounded officer tells John to run and capture David. Later, David calls a corrupt detective, and tells him to take care of John. Then David calls his aide Arcady, and tells him to start the show. John goes to an abandoned house and treats his wounds. He calls Rain to talk about David, and how he blackmails his victims. The other officers locate his position, and head towards him, but John is already leaving. Later, Detective Rain calls her daughter, to tell her that she will arrive later this evening. David sneaks into Rain's house, and kidnaps her daughter. In the meantime, John visits Corinne to tell her that he is very close to catching David. John asks her a couple of questions, and learns that Corinne has met a new man who has been comforting her during this difficult time. Here, John realizes that the man is indeed David, who later calls Rain from her daughter's phone, and orders to take care of John if she wants to save her daughter. As a result, Rain calls John, and proposes that they work together to find David, but in reality, she wants to put him out of business to save her daughter. John and Rain meet, and she threatens him to get into the trunk to take him to David. However, she realizes that she is doing the wrong thing, and reluctantly agrees to work together. The two pay a visit to David's ex-wife, and discover where he performs his horror shows. The wife reveals that the Red Bunker, the place where he tortures people, is in a house in Norway. The corrupt detective calls David, and informs him that Rain has left for Norway. At this point, David realizes that his ex-wife has betrayed him, and he orders the corrupt detective to kill her. That night, the corrupt detective enters David's house, and prepares to kill her, but is stopped by the policeman who expected this attack. The corrupt detective doesn't think twice, and kills himself by injecting poison. John and Rain arrive at David's house in Norway, and find Rain's daughter dead. However, when Rain takes a closer look at the body, she realizes that it is not her daughter. Suddenly, David's aide arrives and hits Rain, and ties her neck. Other side, John walks and arrives in a basement, where he is attacked by David. John wakes up tied to a chair, and David starts his show, The Red Bunker. In this place, he tortures kidnapped victims on a live stream. For his followers, he forces Rain to torture John, or he will kill her daughter, so Rain is forced to stab John in the stomach. Next, he orders John to hit Rain in the knee with a hammer. However, John fails to do so, and reveals that David's ex-wife has reported this address to the police. Suddenly, spectators watching the show begin to leave the site. In fear of being discovered, David tries to escape, and as the doors close, John pursues him. On the other hand, Rain and her daughter get stuck inside, and try to fight David's assistant. David climbs into a car, and John manages to jump inside. After a long struggle, the car falls into the freezing water. John manages to get David's phone, and opens the bunker doors to free the girls. Soon, the police arrive by helicopter there. The villain gets trapped under the water, and dies. John is about to die, but fortunately, he is rescued by the divers. After this he has to be arrested, because he escaped from prison. However, few months later, after recovering, John is approached by a senior MI5 official, who offers him a job instead of returning to prison. With this the movie ends here. Thank you.